Welcome to Safety Spectrum, your environmental health and safety connection. This program is a presentation of the Michigan Safety Conference. For almost a century, the annual conference has provided credible educational opportunities and valuable support to the safety and health practitioner by offering 120 instructional programs, along with exhibits highlighting the latest in safety equipment, instrumentation, and demonstrations. To learn more about the conference, please find us at MICH, safetyconference.org. Welcome to Safety Spectrum. I'm your host, Sheila Ide. This program is sponsored by the Michigan Safety Conference, and our topic today is mental health in the workplace. Many challenges exist for employers with a shrinking workforce, sophisticated technology, challenging customer relations, and the pressure for speed and efficiency. One area that we do not always talk about is mental fitness and its impact on the job. Our guest today will discuss this concern. My guest, Sean Egan, is Deputy Director, Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. He oversees the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Workers' Disability Compensation Agency, the Bureau of Employment Relations, and the Wage and Hour Division. He also spearheads the state's recently launched Workplace Mental Health Initiative. Originally a journeyman electrician by training, he became a labor attorney for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 876. He is a graduate of Davenport University and the Western Michigan University Cooley Law School. Sean currently serves on the Board of Governors for the Joint Michigan Apprenticeship Program, is a delegate to the Kent-Ionia Labor Council, and president of the Labor Heritage Society of West Michigan, as well as volunteering for several other organizations, including the United Way. So thank you for joining me today, Sean.
Thanks so much for having me, Sheila. I'm really excited to have this discussion today on this important topic.
So what got the state of Michigan involved in mental health initiative?
So as we all know, we're doing a lot of great work in Leo and across the state to help people get into the workplace, retain people, recruit people, bring people to Michigan. And we're doing all this great work. And about a year ago, the governor in her State of the State address talked about mental health. And what she was talking about was community resources. But as the Department of Labor, our director, Susan Corbin, and myself, thought that we really should take a look at workplaces. So we know there's a lot of great work going on to help people with what are known disabilities get in and stay in the workplace, but there's not really any discussion happening on what's going on in our workplaces with people's well-being and mental health and how that impacts their ability to work, their ability to keep working, and how that helps and shrinks our labor force altogether. So we put together a work group composed of large employers, small employers, union reps, professionals, construction industry, manufacturing industry, you name it. We spent a few months kind of looking through data and came up with our own report, which you can all find at michigan.gov/workplace mental health. And some of the data I'll mention today is from there. It put out that report, and since then we've really just been out and about trying to talk about this important issue, and we're continuing to develop resources. So it really stemmed from the governor highlighting this as an issue. We know that the pandemic has kind of opened the door to discussion, and we're really excited to be at the forefront of all of the states, frankly, that are leading the charge.
That's right. You were named the COVID safety person during the pandemic. So you have a little bit of the background for this. And it did raise a lot of issues. I think I'm embarrassed to say we didn't really talk about. So it's become more of a topic of discussion that fitness for duty means more than physical fitness, but also mental fitness. So do you believe we're facing an epidemic of mental illness?
Yes, absolutely. I think we've been growing this way for a long time. I think, Sheila, you and I are old enough that, mental health was treated very differently when we were growing up. And as I've shared before, that when I was young and we heard about mental health, it typically meant somebody that we had a known lifelong condition that they were going to be dealing with. And we were kind of taught that depression is a lifelong condition that's genetic, and that's not necessarily true either. And the pandemic really exposed all of this in a big way. Now, there are natural cycles to sort of community mental health when you have something like a pandemic or a natural disaster. We're partnered with DHHS on the programs we're doing, and they have a great graphic that kind of shows what happens to us all collectively as you're kind of flowing through these challenging times. But one of the data points that we found is prior to the pandemic, the CDC still does this, but they do these pulse surveys where they ask people if they have symptoms of anxiety and depression. Now, just symptoms, and we'll talk a little more about anxiety and depression. So in January through June of 2019, about 11% of people surveyed said that they had some kind of symptoms related to anxiety. About a year into the pandemic, January of 2021, that number had shot up to 41% of
Oh,
respondents
that's a
saying
that's a major response. My goodness, 40%.
the way
That
that
admit it, that will admit it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way they do this data, we'll see hopefully 22 pretty soon, but it takes a long time for that data to come out. But that can tell you just kind of what we're facing. And all of these people are at work. I think that's one thing we want employers to understand. These folks are at work, and these conditions themselves have a significant impact on the ability of people to work.
That's true. When you talk about mental illness, the changes during the different generations, diversity is what's kind of driving this. I think before we didn't really realize that there were other types of issues, disabilities or inabilities in mental fitness. And I like to use the word mental fitness because I think most people are fine, but they may have an occasion or a stress or something that takes them past that point. So what do you believe are the underlying causes?
Well, what we have in our report and some of our webinars, I love to talk about this concept of brain science. Now, I wasn't really familiar with this before we started our work group, but the professionals came in and really talked about what stress does to people. Now, all of us that have been around for a while, have been to conferences, maybe even the Michigan Safety Conference has done some topics that are related to how to cope with stress. And we hear about yoga and breathing and all of these great tools that can really help us kind of come back down. But what the professionals taught me was that even though we all might respond differently to the same stress in front of us, once our stress response activates, we all have the exact same response. And what happens is all of our great thinking in our logic center almost shuts off. And then this little spot in our brain that evolved with us through evolution, the amygdala, which controls our flight, fight, freeze, or fawn responses that we're also familiar with, engages and basically takes over. And it functions on emotion and stored memory. And it gets information before your thinking center does. So we have to position ourselves in a way that we can respond to it quickly and shut it off. The response is important from an evolutionary standpoint. We always talk about getting chased by a bear in the woods. There was a time where we were outdoors all the time, and that could happen. But that amygdala doesn't understand that getting that pile of work or something happening at home is not necessarily the same type of threat as that bear chasing you in the woods. But once it responds, logic center shuts off, and we cannot move forward intellectually until that stress is deactivated. And the most common outcome from that stress lasting too long is anxiety and depression that people are going to be dealing with moving forward. And we'll get into some of the data on what that means in the workplace. But what's happened is this was already happening to us. We didn't really talk about it much and didn't pay attention to it. And then the pandemic just kind of blew the roof off the whole thing. So
Sure.
all of us collectively are feeling pretty horrible, and we're not exactly sure why. A lot of the crazy stuff we see in the news, you can now attribute to what we saw through the pandemic and this heightened state of anxiety and depression, because that stress response is activated and our logic center is not functioning the way that we want it to.
I mean, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but it does seem like emotion is first and
Yes.
before logic is what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. There's a couple of parts of our brain when that stress response activates that function on emotion almost exclusively and stored memories of how we responded to similarly stressful situations, even if they're not the same. So we'll have that fight, flight, fawn, or freeze response, even though the type of stress we're facing may not be something that's life-threatening.
Well, it seems to be it's a problem for the workplace. I mean, I have to ask, what role does perception play? Because, like you said, we come from a time when people didn't talk about their issues or their emotions or what have you. So, what role does perception play with dealing with mental issues in the workplace?
Yeah,
How is it perceived?
there's certainly generational issues, because I think a lot of us have been trained and educated in a way that we still view mental health as, something's wrong with Sean. We don't really picture it as maybe it's a system problem, maybe it's an environmental problem, maybe Sean just needs a little help or some time off to get that stress response to shut down. And we don't always look at each other equally, right? We have a tendency as humans to project how we behave or how we feel onto others. So somebody responding to a stressful situation that you don't find stressful at all, you're going to view them in a way that doesn't recognize what role their brain is playing in the processing of this information. And you're going to probably degrade them or put them beneath you in a way that says, oh, they're not quite right. And that's not the way we should be functioning. We also don't talk about it enough. I think I talk with a lot of employers, and they are interested in the space, they're focusing on it, and they're trying to move forward and figure out what it is you can do to manage these things. But the average worker, I don't believe, is even close to feeling comfortable talking about some kind of mental health issue that can impact their ability to work. Often our employee assistance programs, which can be a valuable tool, are tied to HR departments. And in my experience, the HR department is the group that's going to discipline you, promote you, recruit you, fire you, whatever it is. And going to them and saying that, hey, this thing is happening to me and I don't think I can work today, or I can't produce as much as I normally should or could, is really not a conversation that people are going to have. And I know I shared with you previously, Sheila, that coming from the construction industry in particular, we know that jobs add people and then jobs shed people because that's just the nature of the industry. And seeing a coworker fail could actually be a benefit to me, that I might last longer. My job security is going to be a little bit longer. So I might be reluctant to kind of step over and say, hey, what's going on? Are you doing okay? Because it's clear that something's going on with you. And we probably don't do that consciously. But for all of us, we're trying to take care of our families, ourselves, and all those kinds of things. I might benefit from somebody else failing. And I don't think that's I don't think that's who we are as a people. But I think it's important for us to talk about it out loud because we need to recognize that might be happening. Much like you said about diversity, I know many of us, including ourselves in the state of Michigan, have done implicit bias trainings where you just learn about ways that you perceive other people, and whether you are conscious of it or not, you have built-in biases. I think the same is true when we talk about mental health. So perception is important. I think learning more about brain science and recognizing how we respond to this chronic stress or stress in general, and that we're all wired the same, kind of really tells me that we have to look at each other a little bit differently and recognize that even though somebody might be struggling, it doesn't mean they're not a great person. It doesn't mean they're not smart. It doesn't mean they're not capable. It just means they're having a challenge right now.
It's interesting that you mentioned generational differences. Going way back in my HR history, we talked about the Massey tapes, and the Massey tapes talked about what generation, what they were exposed to. Like my parents were part of World War II, Depression, that sort of thing. They grew up in that atmosphere, where our children were in a whole different world of the swinging 60s and all that kind of stuff. So where you come from has an impact as well. So you talk about construction. What would you think are some of the specific issues that occur in construction workers? Why would that be a big problem?
Yeah, so I know for a fact, because of me, I know that one of the things you're always thinking about as a construction worker is job security and financial security, because the nature of our industry swings with the business cycles, and work may be booming right now. And I know we're all desperate for skilled tradespeople to come and do these projects. But if just a few years from now, it could look completely different and you're going to have long periods of unemployment. So you're trying to manage how that works. We know that jobs come to an end. So how long will I be working this year? What kind of gap might I have between projects? Sometimes you're lucky and you're on long ones, and sometimes they're not very long, and you're going to have these periods of unemployment. Often you're traveling, you're away from home. We always joke that there's a reason journey is in the title, right? That you're going to have for the work that you do from time to time. That's what we do. That creates additional stresses in the household. It creates additional stresses for the individual. So there's always kind of a level of chronic stress that's happening. And as we all know, construction is a higher hazard industry. And any workplace that has hazards prevalent is going to create a level of stress that's going to be different from an office environment, let's say. In fact, in our model that we're looking at, the WHO came out with kind of the model about a decade ago, maybe a little bit longer, on kind of how you create a mentally healthy workplace. And the number one thing they said is you have to take care of the physical safety aspects of the workplace. And that's what the safety conference does. That's what all the safety professionals do. And we're very good at it, even in construction, but it's still hazardous, right? We're trying to remove the hazards. Or eliminate them if we can, but you're trying to reduce the potential hazard. And that's going to create stress for the individual as well. And we see that with some of the data I think we'll be talking about, Sheila, on one of our primary initiatives around the construction industry suicide rate.
That's interesting. What kind of impacts is this having on the workforce itself? I mean, if we've got people working with not mentally fit, I mean, back when I did drug and alcohol testing programs, we were very careful to train folks not to accuse someone, not to say, oh, you're high, oh, you're drunk. It's more, you're not acting like yourself. We need to have you evaluated by the doctor just to see what's going on. Now, in construction, since we're talking about it, do you think there's more of a stigma in showing any kind of weakness? I mean, maybe that's going too far, but
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I think it's a male dominated industry. I think the stats are pretty clear that men are less likely to go to the doctor. They're less likely to seek help. I think there's a macho kind of manly thing you're supposed to do where you're just tough and you just get through things and you have to manage it. And I think that makes it less likely that on our job sites that the foremen, the stewards, the safety committees that are really engaged in the space and having discussions about understanding how stress is impacting you. I really think it's that simple that people learn about brain science, how stress impacts you, start to understand the feelings that it creates and ways to manage that and bring that stress level back down, that will have a much healthier workplace. And I think in the construction industry and a lot of other blue collar professions that are male dominated or otherwise, you're just going to have this sort of, I'm supposed to be tough. I have to provide. I'm not supposed to worry about what's happening to me. I'm not going to the doctor for some reason. And we're going to just see that impact our workplaces over and over. Now, one of the stats, especially with the safety conference, we look to this group called Mental Health America, and they do an annual employee survey in workplaces across the United States. And one of the metrics that they have covered over the last several years is I find it difficult to concentrate at work. And that's what the answer is for the question. Do you find it difficult? I find it difficult to concentrate at work. And we've seen that number through the pandemic kind of be at about 30 or 40% of respondents saying they find it difficult, to as high as almost 70% now. Now, as a health and safety focused person, hearing somebody say, I can't concentrate at work scares the bejesus out of me, because that's who gets hurt, right? Most of our safety talks in the mornings or when we do them, it's about having your head in the game. If somebody's telling you they can't concentrate, they don't have their head in the game. And one of the primary responses to chronic stress and that depression, anxiety is fogginess, weariness, disengagement. So all of these things are going to lead to potentially more workplace incidents. And
wow.
because of that stigma in the construction industry, we're not going to tell our partner, I don't feel it. I'm not seeing it. I can't concentrate, I'm foggy or whatever it is. So that stigma in that male dominated industry just makes it very difficult to get these messages out there in a way that's going to have a positive impact.
So if they're not dealing with it, how are they? If they're not dealing it with a healthy way, how are they dealing with it in the workplace?
Yeah, so this is one of our primary initiatives and very alarming and scary. So last fall, in conjunction with federal OSHA, my OSHA kicked off our first construction industry suicide prevention week. And we'll have our second one this year between September 4th and 8th. And it's focused on construction industry suicides in particular, because they are an outlier even among other types of industries. Now, it's important to remember these are all working age people. And one of my colleagues on the work group from the construction industry said it best. All of us that are listening today spend a lot of our time thinking about how to make our workplaces more safe. And in the construction industry, with all of that great work that we do, in any given year, we'll likely have somewhere around 1,000 people die at work because of something they were doing at work. In that same year, we'll have 5,500 or so construction workers kill themselves. And we never have that discussion. And that, I don't know how to say it any better, but within our construction industry focus, suicide prevention is a way that people are clearly using to deal with the stresses that they're having. And that is the ultimate flight response, right? I cannot deal with this stress in such a way. They've entered into anxiety and depression, either symptoms or full blown, and have chosen to take their own lives for whatever stress it is that they're facing.
That seems similar to what some veterans are have a high suicide rate as well. So you're kind of, is there comparables there?
Yeah, I think one way I like to phrase it, Sheila, is that when we talk about our veterans in particular, we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. So when we think about the concept of chronic stress, now the trauma that soldiers endure may be much different, right? It could be explosions, death, fatalities, killing. I mean, it could be a different type of stress, but it's still a stress. disorder. It's traumatic stress. Chronic stress and traumatic stress are almost equivalent. Actually, the name is used interchangeably. So where our soldiers may deal with a traumatic episode that's immediate or very, very severe, and that's the thing that created that condition. Chronic stress does the same thing. It's just typically over time. Then it's going to change your brain in a way that's going to cause you to do this. So there's a definite connection there. And I think if you look at our report, we have some of the statistics from the national rate. Michigan's rate is actually a little higher than this, but construction and extraction workers were 52 per 100,000 workers. 52 out of every 100,000 would commit suicide. And the next closest industry was about 15 people lower. So that's why we're focused on construction. But in that data, 8 out of the top 10 jobs are blue collar production type jobs that are more heavily male dominated industries. So I think there's a clear connection there about that stigma that you were referencing in construction and that male dominated industry kind of carrying through all of them. And then the other ways we do have information, and I won't belabor it right now because I know we want to keep the discussion going, but we have information in there about substance abuse, so alcohol, definitely one of the common tools that people use to deal with stress. Not a healthy choice, but it's a choice that people make. And then illicit drug use. And, it's quite prevalent out there in our industries that people are choosing those types of things. And we don't have at this point, but certainly opioid use, right? We know in the construction industry, I should have probably mentioned that when you asked about characteristics. Think about industries that are extremely physically demanding, where you're likely to have common workplace conditions like knee pain, hip pain, wrist pain, where you're probably going to be prescribed opioids and you have to continue with that. That's adding to that stress as well in a different kind of way.
Yeah, I know serious accidents and fatalities do have an impact on even people who are somewhat stable, because I unfortunately had to investigate a couple fatalities in my career. And the best thing we could do is we brought in psychologists, the supervision all left the room, and then they could just vent. They could talk about what they were feeling, how they were feeling. They could say anything they wanted, and it anonymously. I think it meant so much to these people just be able to get out what they were feeling in a safe environment. So what can employers do to impact the prevalence of mental stresses? I mean, what can we do? What are our tools?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think everything we often do in the employer community in our world, right, is it's dollars and cents. There's a lot of dollars and cents that are happening here that employers aren't going to know about. So I think first and foremost, just get it right that we need to engage in this space. So the American Heart Association did a survey of workplaces as well, and employees in those workplaces, 76% reported having some kind of mental health issue. But less than half, and you'll see this in data over and over again, less than half sought out treatment. So this is happening in a big way in our workplaces and to our people, but less than half are going to go kind of seek the help that they need to get over that condition. So we can have an impact, though. I'm going to get there. We can have an impact because if we recognize this is happening and start thinking about how we work, what's going on in our work, and how are we structured in a way that can impact people's chronic stress levels and put them in a better spot, less than half will go seek treatment. Now, the other side of that, though, is we don't have the resources to treat everybody. So even if we suddenly convinced everybody stigma's gone, go get help, talk to a therapist, whatever it is you need, we don't have enough people to do that. So employers are going to be dealing with this, whether they engage directly or just kind of bear the brunt of the costs that they're facing because this is happening. And then only a third of those that went and sought treatment told their employer. So in the employer space, you're not going to know about it. So maybe a third of those folks that are getting help will let you know. But for the most part, you're going to run into this blind a little bit and just have to start thinking about this is impacting our workplace safety and health program. It's impacting productivity and otherwise. And about 65% of employees surveyed identified work as their number one stress. So when we're thinking about chronic stress and bringing that down, now I remind everybody, we don't have stress buckets. If I'm stressed and you ask me right now, what's stressing you out, it might be work, right? But I don't have a bucket I can leave that says this is the home stress, this is the work stress. So, let's give that answer a little variability, but I think it's important for employees to hear that employees are saying, work is the number one stress, which means work is best positioned to deal with it. That's also where we are for the majority of our waking hours as an adult in one place or with one group of people. It's going to be the workplace. So my colleague that works with me here in Leo told me, in any given day, we're going to be connected for 8 hours. And then that same day, with all the running around we do in life, he might see his wife for 2. So who's better positioned to kind of know when something's happening to him and say like, hey, I see a change in your behavior? It's probably going to be me. So that's important to do that. But first and foremost, employers are already paying for this. Now you're seeing it in things you can account for, which is absenteeism, tardiness. The average person out there is going to take about 8 sick days annually. Somebody with depression, it's 27.
Huh.
So you have 20 additional absenteeism days that are happening because somebody has depression. And depression can be fleeting. I mentioned that in my growing up, we assumed it was genetic. Stanford Medicine put out a report a while back that said they believe they can tie maybe 40 or 50% of the depression that exists in our country right now to genetics. So that means 50 or 60% of the depression we're dealing with is coming from other stuff. And we're best positioned to do that. Where employers are really paying for it, though, is this concept of presenteeism. So in our report, you'll find all this data, but Tufts University really went through and studied presenteeism because these folks are coming to work. And when I mentioned they have confusion, brain fogginess, their logic center might not be engaged, their brain will not allow them to move forward. So it's not that I decided I'm not going to be a great employee anymore. My brain literally will not allow me to move forward until I deactivate that stress response. And and that's what resilience really is getting to, is finding ways to shut that off. But they found that presenteeism related to depression was the most expensive chronic condition affecting workplaces, to the tune of $109 per employee that you have. So if you have one person dealing with presenteeism, 109 times however big your workforce is. They also found that you can really layer down. It's basically about 10% of your workforce at any given time is going to be experiencing depressive symptoms. So, you start multiplying that out. This one's not on the spreadsheet, right? You can't account for presenteeism, but you can see it in lost productivity. So this is where your productivity losses really are happening. And CDC just released a report on the prevalence of depression by state. And it was asking people if they've ever had any medical provider, nurse, doctor, psychiatrist, anybody, tell them that they may have depression. In Michigan, we're about 20% of people. So picture your workplace, about 20% of people coming in the door have likely at some point been told that they have some kind of depression. Throw that in with presenteeism, throw that in with tardiness. We're really having a problem. So you're already paying for it, whether you see it there directly or not. And then about 40% of all turnover is related to job stress. So
40%. That's amazing.
Yes.
There's got to be different levels of depression, though. There could be times when this particular month has been particularly stressful, and then I get over it. I mean, everybody's not at crisis stage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're really trying to work on, Sheila, how we manage the words illness, crisis, issue, because we don't know really what they mean. Illness clearly means you've been diagnosed by somebody, but that's an important point, and I'm so glad you raised it, is that in any given year, 1 in 5 people is going to have a mental health issue. So there's more than 5 people on this call right now. That means at least one of us, and you think about a 5-year period, it means all of us have experienced a mental health issue of some sort. And your point is extremely valid. When we talk about depression, again, I think it's lifelong, you're going to need treatment forever. And the reality is, it can be very, very short. You can have it once in your life. You can have just this one period where you've experienced some kind of depression that you're getting over, and you might come out of it without help at all. It might just be a way that you change your behavior. So I think that's critical. It could be, certainly some people are fighting these challenges for their whole life, but for most of us, it's just going to be a brief period of kind of the stress going too high that we got to come back from.
Then conversely, the other side, the epitome is someone coming in and shooting up the workplace, which is probably related to stressors or blaming the work for their problems. I mean, that's pretty much what the experts tell us.
Yeah, that would be that fight response, right?
Yep. Okay. So you mentioned something about 5 steps program.
Yeah. So one thing important for all the employers, everybody listening, is remind everybody this is a journey, not a destination. There is no right answer. I mean, if you're kind of thinking like I have no idea what to do, just start with something. Whether it is some of those trainings that are about try how to be more resilient, how to do breathing exercises, how to reduce your stress. All of that is about finding ways to shut off that stress response to allow us to think through it. So in our report we came up with what we thought were kind of like first steps that employers could think about, and we call them steps because you're never going to be done. You're going to find new ways to manage this. One would be to find ways to assess your workplace. Michigan State University was one of our partners on the work group, and they help people set up surveys specific to their place of employment. NIOSH, you're all very familiar with, has a survey. It is a very NIOSH survey, so it's very long. So it might not be perfect for your workplace, but it's very thorough because it is a NIOSH survey, but it's long. That one's a little more challenging. Uh, to figure out what's going on there, figure out what that culture is. And, it's surveys, right? So look at your participation rate, all that kind of stuff. Look at your workplace policies and procedures. So we have a monthly webinar series in the fall. We're going to have J.W. Fisher from Fisher Construction. He's been out there talking on this issue a lot. And one thing he found when they started focusing on it was, even though you're supposed to have mental health parity, the benefits provided between their healthcare and mental health weren't quite identical. And the deductibles worked differently and everything was kind of weird. So he fixed all of it. But think about, can you use a sick day for mental health? Can you take a PTO day for a mental health day? How are you allowing people to communicate with you? How are you working? Are you really creating so much stress on people that they can't function? And think about that. Recommit to employee assistance programs. And many of you might have those that are fantastic, but statistically across the country, only 4% of employees are ever going to use the employee assistance program. And that tells me that the programs, we got to think about how we're structuring those programs, what they're connected to and what they're doing. One thing I learned from the University of Michigan, who has evaluated employee assistance programs, is many employers are selecting employee assistance programs based on the company that's providing it and their business acumen. Are they financially sound? How long have they been in business? How is their management team? Instead of focusing on what do they provide to the employees. So we heard from one that might do mental health care. We heard from another with a great response rate where employees suddenly started missing work. Turned out that it's a lower wage employee. Their car had died. They had no way to fix the car. Were stressed out. That employee assistance program somehow or another found a grant program that helps low income people, got them a car, everything's back to normal. So look at what the employee assistance program is doing. Develop ways to engage and empower employees. All the survey says you can't really fix this stuff if employees don't feel that they're empowered and engaged in the discussion. So you can't just fix it from the top. And then finally, for all of the safety professionals, consider adding this into any joint employer-employee safety committee programs that you have. Great way to pull that in and say this affects workplace safety and health, ramp up the message in the workforce, and really start bringing it home.
Those are all things that everybody can do. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Have you got any other final thoughts that you want to relay to us at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. We're in it together. So coming from the construction industry, your head's got to be in the game. You really got to be focused on the task at hand, but you need everybody else at the job site to do the same. So when we think about some of the stats I shared, and you can find them all in our report, but the stats I shared about people coming in and that presenteeism and the fogginess and not being able to concentrate, that's really going to have an impact on how well we're going to be able to maintain our workplace safety culture, avoid industries and prevent industries, reduce hazards, and keep people's head in the game. I think most importantly for employers, as you take this back, is just really focus in on you're paying for it. You're already paying for this, whether you see it there directly or not on the bottom line, it is in there. And if you want to enhance productivity and all of those things that we need to do, especially with the labor shortage, you're going to want to make sure that you're paying attention to this. And there's good news on the other side. There's survey results that show that employers whose employees believe their employer cares about their mental health are 69% less likely to look for another job. So we think about recruitment, right?
Huge, huge, huge.
It's huge. They're not going to look for another job. 71% are going to be less likely to experiencing burnout. We didn't talk a lot about burnout, but all of this chronic stress, the emotional, all that kind of stuff is that burnout point. And that's right when you're going to hit the anxiety and depressive symptoms and episodes. They're going to be 5 times more likely to promote you as a place to work. So you're going to try to recruit people. They're going to be out there doing it for you. They're going to be experiencing 36% are going to be more likely to be thriving in their own personal life. So they're choosing healthy outcomes. And they're 3 times more likely to be engaged at work. So the data is pretty clear that you're paying for this. It's going to help you with productivity, and it's going to keep the people that you have. I know during COVID, you probably heard me say this, but now the best way to deal with a labor shortage is to keep the people you have. So if this tool is there, it's available. You can find more resources on our website that I mentioned, and we're going to continue to develop that. We have a monthly webinar series where just last month we talked about what you talked about, Sheila, on trauma happens in the workplace. You know, we talked to the state police, but I reminded everybody that we just a few weeks back, we had a construction worker killed in a work zone on the highway, and all the workers there now have experienced a trauma. So if we're not thinking about like how they're impacted, we're really going to miss the boat. So I think we're in a great spot now to keep having these discussions, and just thank you so much for having me as part of the safety company.
I throw you a curveball here a little bit. Are you aware of any studies that have correlated accidents with depression?
We have searched far and wide, and they are not there specifically. Okay. I think there's a lot of anecdotal.
Sure.
No question for all of you when I say they're confused or they're foggy, you know, we would see the correlation there, but there's nothing specifically saying they're, you know, X amount more likely for that to occur.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of figured there wasn't, but I thought I'd ask the question. Well, in addition to providing a safe and healthy workplace for all employees, an employer must look beyond the physical by recognizing and addressing the mental challenges as well. And it's a larger percentage than what I think any of us understood. So I'd like to thank Sean Egan, Deputy Director of Michigan's Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. And I think we can get more information at michigan.gov/workplace health, mental health, right? That's your website. Say, if you have any questions about the podcast, the Michigan Safety Conference, or if you'd like to be a guest or sponsor one of our podcasts, information can be found on our website at michsafetyconference.org. Thank you for listening to Safety Spectrum. This is Sheila Ide.